Hello and welcome. This is Business Incorporated on Channels Television. Thank you for joining us. I'm Chimeze Obi Iwago. On the program today, World Bank President says debt cancellation needed to help poorest countries. South Africa restores free visa for countries including US. And we will be meeting a Nigerian vehicle parts manufacturer seeking to bridge gender gap. First, the markets. And most major markets here in Africa began the week in the positive territory. Nigeria's main index surged to 1.23%, driven by the 2.07% increase from the banking sector, while South Africa's JSE index was marginally higher by 0.06%. The EGX 30 in Egypt was the only laggard at intraday. And investor sentiment in the Middle East were mixed at intraday. Both markets in the UAE posted declines as the Dubai index shaved off 0.89%, while the Abu Dhabi index was lower by 0.11%. Elsewhere in the region, the markets in Saudi Arabia and Qatar were marginally higher by 0.04% and 0.03%. And in Europe, stocks advanced this morning as global markets are calmed by reports of President Trump's improving health as he's treated for COVID-19. Let's hear more from Chelsea Dulani. Good afternoon, Chelsea. Good to see you again. Well, U.S. President Donald Trump could be released from the hospital as soon as today after contracting coronavirus, while EU head Ursula von der Leyen is now in isolation after coming in contact with someone infected with COVID. How are markets reacting?
We have seen markets really around the world starting on a much more solid foot this week. Here in Frankfurt, the DAX is up almost 1%. U.S. stock futures are also pointing higher. This does come as reports indicate that President Trump is doing better. There had been a lot of confusion and a lot of concern over the weekend about the severity of the symptoms President Trump is experiencing. There had been many conflicting reports from both his doctors and some of White House officials about how serious he was facing the virus. So it does appear that he is feeling better, which to some degree removes some of the concerns around the political situation in the United States. And it also does indicate that he could be getting back to the campaign trail and also to work again soon. One of the big questions is how this impacts stimulus talks in the United States. Both Republicans and Democrats are trying to get a stimulus package passed before the end of before the U.S. election. So this could add some urgency to those talks, and that would be a big benefit for markets because the U.S. economy is starting to fumble a little bit. So people are really keeping an eye on the stimulus talks as well.
Well, Brexit is top on the agenda this week. Negotiations are ramping up back with the EU's chief negotiator set to meet with German Chancellor Angela Merkel today in Berlin. What are the latest on the prospects for a deal before year end?
Well, what we've heard over the past couple of days from both the UK and from the EU side has been quite disappointing. A lot of leaders are really starting to consider the idea that there might not be a deal before the end of the year. We've heard really the same line from both sides. We need to consider and start preparing for a deal to not come through. There's really only a couple more weeks where a deal will be possible. Boris Johnson in the UK had hoped to wrap up negotiations by the middle of this month. The EU says they could maybe push it a little bit further, but it does have to be done basically by the end of the month if they want to get this through by the end of the year. And there still are a lot of difficult issues on the table in these negotiations that have really not got any closer to being solved. And so I think we are starting to see people really consider the prospects of a no deal, and that will obviously have a lot of economic consequences for both the UK and the EU.
And the operator of the Frankfurt Stock Exchange wants to revamp the DAX index after the accounting scandal at former member Wirecard tarnished its reputation. What are the proposals?
So today we've heard several proposals from the operator of the stock exchange, and this does come after the dramatic implosion of Wirecard, which had really been a stock market darling here in Germany. It was in the DAX 30, the really prestigious blue chip index here in Germany, and its demise really raised a lot of questions about how the stock exchange operator and how the DAX was structured and what sort of oversight there was. So now what we are seeing on the table is, for one, stricter rules about being included in this prestigious index. They want it to change the rules so that you would have to be profitable before you enter the DAX. They also would include penalties or potentially a lever that would allow them to kick companies out of the DAX if they miss financial reports, which had been a big problem with Wirecard. They had repeatedly postponed financial reports. So that would be one way that they could sort of control and mitigate risk in their members. But they also do want to expand the DAX. So right now there are 30 companies in the DAX. They want to expand it to 40, which would really they allow them, according to the operator and also to investors and other analysts, it would allow the DAX to be more representative of the broader German economy. Right now, the DAX is very much dominated by these very old, traditional German companies, industrial conglomerates, car companies, and they want it to be more reflective of the new economy, tech companies, and things like that. So it would allow them to take a broader approach to the DAX inclusion.
Well, thank you, Chelsea. Well, I guess Trump's health will top the agenda for this week. We'll continue to keep a track on that and see how the markets are following that trend. Enjoy the rest of the day. And Britain's services companies continue to cut jobs last month despite growth holding up better than feared. The latest survey of purchasing managers across UK services firms shows that layoffs continued last month, a trend that is worsening with Cineworld's closures. For more, let's bring in Juliana. Hello, Juliana. Good afternoon. Well, latest UK service sector PMI has come in at 56.1 for September, better than the flash reading of 55.1 recorded during the month. Is this a market-moving data at the moment, or are the markets being moved by the news of Trump's recovery from COVID-19?
Well, both stories are shaping sentiment at intraday. As you were just discussing in Frankfurt, I think there's been so much confusion over the weekend about the health status of Donald Trump, the US president. But, of course, you've got to go with the on-the-record statement. And the on-the-record statement suggests that he could actually be released later today. So that's obviously cheered investors across the world as well as here in the UK. And as you said, yes, we got those PMI service figures for September. It had dropped a little. In August, it was 58.8, but of course that Eat Out to Help Out scheme really did boost the service industry. And as you said, the 56.1 is still much better than the flash estimate and much better than economists that did have it down by about that 55 ballpoint figure. There are some economists that do believe the PMI will still maintain its level next month, as the Bank of England have also said that they suspect the third quarter we will go back to rapid growth. But I think there are fears about what happens for the rest of the year in the fourth quarter, as at the end of this month, that furlough scheme is going to be coming to an end. And so to have a look at the numbers, the all share is up 0.64% at intraday. The FTSE 100 is up by 0.61% and the FTSE 250 is up by 0.76%. In the currencies market, the pound is up on the US dollar by 0.07%, down on the euro by 0.23% and up on the Japanese yen by 0.36%.
In the meantime, the news that Cineworld was preparing to close its UK cinemas broke yesterday, casted a shadow over the whole sector. How are cinema goers reacting to this?
Well, I don't think cinema goers are reacting at all, and that's part of the reason why Cineworld is having to make such a swift decision, closing 660 of its stores across the world. This will affect their 45,000 global workforce. Cineworld is Britain's biggest cinema, but unfortunately they just haven't seen a return to the cinemas. I think there was one huge film called Tenet, which I actually went to go and see as well, but it wasn't the blockbuster that they're looking for. And of course, during the pandemic, all major Hollywood and other world cinema films, they did shut down. And I think the straw that broke the camel's back was the new James Bond film, No Time to Die, being postponed until April. And they just didn't feel that they could keep the cinemas open and keep paying their overheads with old releases being shown on the screen. So they have made this rash decision. Apparently, I believe their 6 months first half year results showed that they'd lost £1.3 billion. And there have been some major films that have gone straight to streaming sites. There have been some Disney movies, including Mulan, which was supposed to be a massive audience grabber. It's gone straight to streaming. Perhaps this is the way Hollywood will be going over the next couple of months. It's a huge story. And as soon as it was announced, I believe their shares crashed by 50% on the FTSE this morning.
And aside from Trump, what else is on the radar this week for markets?
But again, as you were discussing with Chelsea and Frankfurt, Brexit is the top of the agenda here in Britain. The 11th round, I believe, of negotiations will kick off again this week. As you said, Michel Barnier is speaking with Angela Merkel in Germany. There was a discussion between Ursula von der Leyen, the EU Commission President, and the Prime Minister Boris Johnson on Saturday. The discussion apparently went well. Yes, Boris Johnson did put a self-imposed deadline of the 15th of October. That's unlikely to be the case, of course. We're expecting some decision to be made perhaps in the first weekend of November. And yes, it does look like we could be heading for a no-deal Brexit, but I would say, shouldn't speak too soon. Last week, there were suggestions from people who were close to the matter that concessions had been made on both sides. There are still lots of tensions. Of course, this internal market bill, which breaks the international treaty that Boris Johnson signed, is causing a stir. But who knows? Boris Johnson, again, was speaking over the weekend. He actually gave an interview to Andrew Marr on the BBC, and he does still believe a deal can be done. He knows a deal needs to be done if he wants to impress the city. The Confederation of British Industry did a survey, I believe, earlier this morning, and still overwhelmingly 77% of Britain's biggest business want a deal. So I don't think it's a case of just closing the chapter and walking away. I think they are going to be working extensively, but of course the clock is still ticking. But I think most importantly, there is still time, and I think that's what the markets are weighing in on.
Well, I guess we have quite a lot to chew in the week. Brexit, Trump, and so on. Let's keep a track on those. Enjoy the rest of the day. In Asia, shares in Australia led gains among the region's major markets, with the S&P ASX 200 up 2.59% as shares of the country's major banks surged. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index rose 1.32%. In Japan, the Nikkei 225 rose 1.23%, while the Topix Index gained 1.74%. South Korea's Kospi added 1.29%. Markets in China were closed on Monday for a holiday. And stock futures rose early Monday as investors brace for another volatile week, with President Donald Trump's hospitalization adding more uncertainty to the market outlook ahead of Election Day. Futures on the Dow Jones Industrial Average pointed to an opening gain of more than 170 points. The S&P 500 futures and the Nasdaq 100 futures both traded in positive territory. Trump said in a minute-long video posted on Twitter late Sunday that, and I quote, "We are getting great reports from the doctors." The president also took a short, last-minute motorcade ride to wave to his supporters standing outside the hospital. And away from the markets, the World Bank President David Malpass says the COVID-19 pandemic could trigger a debt crisis in some countries, so investors must be ready for granting some form of relief that could also include debt cancellation. Rich countries last month backed an extension of the G20's debt service suspension initiative approved in April to developing nations survive the coronavirus pandemic, which has seen 43 of a potential 73 eligible countries defer defer $5 billion in official sector debt payments. Amid warnings the pandemic could push 100 million people into extreme poverty, Mr. Malpass renewed his call for private banks and investment funds to get involved too. Malpass warns that the pandemic could trigger another debt crisis as some developing countries had already entered a downward spiral of weaker growth and financial trouble. All right, we'll take a break now, and when we come back, we'll look at tourism in Africa when we return. Do stay with us. South Africa has reinstated free visas for travelers from countries including the U.S. after suspending them in March as part of a strict lockdown to curb the coronavirus. Visas will again be available to visitors from France, Germany, Portugal, Spain, Italy, South Korea, Hong Kong, Iran, and the U.S. International travelers will need to present a negative COVID-19 test results that's no more than 72 hours old or face a mandatory 10-day quarantine. The exemptions come in just days after the reopening of borders to travelers from other African nations represent another easing of the lockdown on a bid to reboot economic growth clobbered by the pandemic. Coronavirus infections continue to decline in South Africa even as the economy reopens. And we have seen tourist arrival numbers collapse because of the COVID-19. That's in Africa. But in recent weeks, some countries have begun easing some travel restrictions. Some of these countries have been most negatively affected by the collapse in tourism. Matt Kiniger, Associate Practice Lead, Sub-Saharan Africa at Docker Frontier, joins me now to look at the tourism and hospitality industries across Africa, the outlook for the industry, and how businesses will be affected by trends. Hello, Matt. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for having me on the show.
Now, African governments began introducing travel restrictions in March. How severe has the downturn in the tourism sector been across the continent over the last 6 months?
Yes, so the downturn in tourism across Africa has been really quite severe. I think very few people expected the travel restrictions when they were introduced to last as long as they have done. And what we've seen is a pretty much entire tourism sectors across Africa have collapsed. So, for example, in South Africa, 99%, there's been a 99% reduction in the number of tourist arrivals in June compared to June 2019. And this is also having a severe negative effect on tourist hotspots, for example, in the Western Cape. So really significant declines. And in Kenya's case, another tourist hotspot in Africa, we've seen international tourist arrivals fall from around 130,000 tourists a month last year to about 500 a month this year. So this has been really quite a dramatic decline, and really far beyond what most people expected, in my opinion.
And before COVID-19 emerged, the tourism industry has grown significantly in Africa in recent decades. Given the sharp drop in tourist arrivals this year, which types of businesses have been most directly affected, and how are they coping?
Yes, so I mean, it's a good question because obviously hospitality has been severely affected. In South Africa, for example, we've seen the hospitality industry take in only 38 million rand in receipts in May. This is down from 2.3 billion rand in February. But other industries have been more indirectly affected. So, for example, the retail sector more broadly has been affected. Card companies, they've been affected by fewer overseas tourists using credit cards in Africa, so they're earning fewer fees. And companies that are selling sort of premium consumer goods, so alcohol, spirits companies are also definitely feeling the pinch from fewer tourist arrivals. And there's also obviously the airlines, which have been really directly affected. We've seen, South African Airways is in a very bad state, but Kenya Airways is now seeking a $500 million bailout from the state to stay afloat as a result of the decline in tourist arrivals and business travelers. So it is really quite significant.
Now, some African countries have begun easing travel restrictions in recent weeks, given that economies are reopening in Europe and North America. How quickly can we expect a bounce back in tourist arrivals across Africa?
Yeah, so actually this is a really important question to be asking, because most of the big spenders in terms of tourism come from Europe and North America, although obviously we have seen an increase in the number of Asian, especially Chinese tourists arriving in Africa. But really, North America and Europe is the biggest annual source of tourist arrivals. But the short answer is we don't expect to see a very quick bounce back in tourism, unfortunately, in sub-Saharan Africa or Africa more broadly. And this is for a couple of reasons. One is that some countries haven't fully reopened their borders yet. So as you mentioned in your introduction, South Africa is reducing restrictions, but it still has some restrictions in place. The other reason is that European and North American and also Asian consumers, tourists who would normally fly to South Africa, especially during the Northern Hemisphere winter, they really don't want to risk catching coronavirus when they're overseas, but also they don't want to face the risk of their holidays being disrupted by coronavirus, or if, for example, there's an increase in restrictions or a new lockdown when they arrive in their country or their holiday destination. And so basically, tourism confidence in North America, Europe, and Asia is very, very low, and it will remain so until an effective COVID-19 vaccine has been found and rolled out globally. So for the foreseeable future or into 2021, a pretty weak outlook for tourism.
All right, thank you very much for your time, Matt. Enjoy the rest of the day. Okay, let's meet the Nigerian entrepreneur Okamaka Okoye, who manufactures motorcycles and tricycle spare parts with the help of a team made up mostly of women in the southeastern town of Nnewi. At her makeshift workshop, she hopes her business can alter perceptions of women in Nigeria's manufacturing and mechanical industries. Let's watch this.
Nigerian entrepreneur Okamaka Okoye sifts through a pile of metal scraps ready to liquefy them at high heat. The 38-year-old manufactures spare parts mainly for motorcycles and tuk-tuks, which are the most popular form of commercial transportation in Nigeria. Okoye picked up her technical skills at a vocational workshop. She set up her own operation named Femco in 2013 with 500,000 naira and started by producing brake levers.
I want to reduce the gap between importation and so that our people will now focus on locally made products, especially the motorcycle spares, because they do go to China or other foreign country to buy those things. Why we can do it here? That is why, as a woman, I want to do something different from other women. So I decided to go into this.
Femco produces a variety of parts from battery head terminals, brake levers, clutch levers, and to footrest for tuk-tuks, which can take 14 days for production and packaging. Okoye is determined to do her part in reducing the gender gap in Nigeria's male-dominated automobile industry. She employs a team of 5 women.
We don't meet our customers' demand due to the way it's been done, but with machines, just like today that we are doing production. If I am to use injection machine, I will get up to 6,000 in a day. But now that I'm doing it manually, at the end of today, we will end up getting like 1,000 pieces or even less.
Spare parts trader Michael Ogbuani regularly buys over 1,000 clutch levers from Femco. Lauding their durability, he says buyers also like Okoye's products because they are 36% cheaper than imported brands.
And that's it on the program. Thank you for watching. I'm Chimeze Obi Iwago.